This is the ceasefire agreement I introduced last spring. Today, Hamas and Israel have agreed to that ceasefire agreement and the whole ending the war. You know, those of you who have followed the negotiations can attest, the road to this deal has not been easy. I've worked in foreign policy for decades. This is one of the toughest negotiations I've ever experienced. And we reached this point because of the pressure that Israel built on Hamas, backed by the United States.
Right before leaving office, Joe Biden announced a ceasefire deal between Israel and Hamas, with an added note that the deal is the same one Netanyahu rejected last spring. In other words, it was his deal.
We can tell you right now that a senior U.S. administration official has told us, CNN, officially that this deal has been done. As you know, it requires confirmation or a vote of passage by the Israeli parliament, but it is done, and it is, in the words of Tony Blinken, the same deal just about, if not identical deal, that President Biden offered last May. So to that point, it is great that people are getting out of their terrible, terrible conditions, both the hostages and the prisoners and the humanitarian needs in Gaza. But this is something that could and should have been done months and months ago when less lives, would have been lost.
It should happen in the coming hours, but until it actually does, we're not there. But if and when it does, two things. It'll be on the basis of the plan that President Biden put forward back in May and that we rallied the entire world behind. And ever since then, we've been working to negotiate the details, the implementation. It's been delayed and derailed by different events, but we're, I think, finally at the point where this gets over the line. Once that happens, here's what happens. First, the firing stops. Hamas, Israel stop firing. Israel pulls back its forces. Hostages begin to be released. Prisoners come out of Israeli jails and go back, and we surge humanitarian assistance to people who so desperately need it. All of that happens during a 6-week period. But also during that 6 weeks, we have to negotiate the understandings to get to a permanent ceasefire so that Israel pulls all of its forces out of Gaza, Hamas doesn't come back in, and there's the necessary governance, security, reconstruction.
CNN's Christiane Amanpour spoke to Anthony Blinken, who told her the same thing Biden did, that it's simply the same deal that wasn't agreed to last year, but the pressure was the tipping point. So while we short-sighted Americans are foolishly bickering over whether or not Joe Biden or Donald Trump deserves credit for these negotiations coming to a conclusion, there are many more aspects that have to come together.
Perhaps the most sobering aspect of the ceasefire deal agreed between Israel and Hamas comes in the opening paragraph. It says the parties and the mediators' objective is to achieve a final consensus to implement the May 27, 2024 agreement. It means 8 months ago, the same agreement was on the table, but back then, the Israelis particularly didn't want to sign it. What's changed now, it seems, is increased pressure, the Qataris say, that's come over the last couple of months. Worth pointing out a couple of aspects of the deal to show how challenging it's going to be to make it stick, particularly with regards to the Philadelphia corridor, that's on the border between Rafah and Egypt. It says that Israeli forces will gradually reduce their presence there, and there'll be a complete withdrawal no later than day 50 after the last captive was released by day 42. That's an indication of how important oversight is going to be and why it was so important that American oversight particularly was a guarantee. Qatar and Egypt, yes, are mediators, but it's the Americans and their renewed commitment with this incoming Trump administration that they will make sure Israel particularly sticks to its side of the bargain.
What's more important than who gets credit for the first phase of a ceasefire is that Netanyahu holds up his end of the deal, which will require more pressure. But despite the small hope that he'll show signs of no longer being committed to further mass killings of innocent people, those that survived celebrated the news.
أن نخلع هذه الخوذة ميادة التي أرهقتني طوال هذه الفترة، وأيضا هذا الدرع الذي كان جزء من جسدي خلال هذه المدة وخلال هذه الفترة الطويلة، والذي كان على مدار الوقت يرافقني، والآن نعلن هنا من داخل قطاع غزة ومن داخل مدينة غزة هذا الإعلان ووقف إطلاق النار للمواطنين لكل سكان غزة الذين تعرضوا إلى حرب الإبادة وتعرضوا إلى القصف وتعرضوا إلى التهجير وتعرضوا إلى النزوح في هذا الموقف وفي هذا المكان الذي أقف فيه أنا.
Journalists that felt like their protective vests and helmets had become part of their bodies removed the gear, while children and grandmothers danced and celebrated their survival after losing so much.
إن شاء الله نتحلف من المسجد الأقصى.
الله أكبر الله أكبر ولله الحمد.
والله تعتبر فرحة كبيرة بالنسبة للشعب اليمني والوطن العربي بسبب وقف إطلاق النار، والفرحة تعم الجميع، ونرجو من الأمة العربية والوطن العربي الوقوف إلى جنب غزة.
طبعا استقبلت هذا الخبر بكامل سعادة، ونزلنا هون للعاصمة حتى نحتفل بإعلان وقف إطلاق النار. إن شاء الله ربنا يفرجها على الأسرى ويفرجها على أخوي علاء عليان يا رب، ويفرجها على جميع الأسرى ويرجعوا لأهاليهم سالمين غنمين بإذن الله تعالى.
But sadly, those celebrations in the streets across multiple countries was very short-lived, because that small hope of Netanyahu ending his aggression towards innocent civilians ended before it even started.
الليلة ضربوا منزل راح ضحيته 35 شهيد. فإحنا بنطلب من الجهات اللي توسطت لهذا التهدئة اللي هي تعجيل في دخولها حيز التنفيذ، لأنه إحنا كل ساعة بنفقد شهداء، كل ساعة بنفقد ضوء. فإحنا بنطالب وبنقول بإنه تخلوش الفرحة تروح في تأجيل حيز التنفيذ الهدنة ليوم الأحد.
بعدما كنا ننقل لكم فرحة الأهالي في داخل قطاع غزة بعد إعلان وقف إطلاق النار، جيش الاحتلال الإسرائيلي أطفأ هذه الفرحة، بل قام بإعدامها. بعد إعدام هؤلاء المواطنين في هذه اللحظات خلال ساعة واحدة فقط 30 شهيد في مدينة غزة. هذه المشاهد الصعبة والمؤلمة، جثامين لشهداء، لأطفال. هؤلاء الأطفال كانوا فرحين بإنهاء الحرب. جيش الاحتلال الإسرائيلي استهدفهم بشكل مباشر.
You know, it's mind-boggling how we can mourn and pray, albeit sometimes with empty intentions, when innocent Americans are killed in the streets, especially when we see their families going through the kind of pain that never ends. But we can watch scenes of this kind of extraordinary death of so many people and have zero emotions or empathy for them. You know, what makes it worse is that it all happens because of the political objectives and endless thirst for power from a small number of people that don't even care about their own citizens, let alone those that they attack like this. Because the reason for these surprise bombings of celebratory people rests with Benjamin Netanyahu's politics. The agreement announced in Doha on Wednesday still needs to be approved by Israel's cabinet, and Netanyahu may not have had the levels of support going into the final talks that he needed. He faces a stark choice: give in to extremist right-wing demands in return to war after a 42-day ceasefire, or accept support from the political opposition and give them veto power over his future in office. The Israeli cabinet has delayed its vote to approve the ceasefire announced on Wednesday. It claims the reason is that Hamas has inserted some last-minute demands, which CNN understands concerns which Palestinian prisoners will be released from Israeli detention. A Hamas spokesperson said the group is committed to the ceasefire agreement that was announced by the mediators. But in the background, a swirl of activity surrounds the ultra-nationalist finance minister Bezalel Smotrich, whose tiny religious Zionist party is key to Netanyahu's ability to govern. The party on Thursday said that as a condition of its support for the ceasefire deal, Netanyahu must commit to restarting the war after 42 days, as soon as the first phase of the truce is over. And if he doesn't, the party said it'll withdraw from the governing coalition. If Netanyahu commits to restart the war after 42 days, and that becomes public knowledge, it could collapse the agreement before it even starts and bring the ire of incoming U.S. President Donald Trump, who has championed the deal as his doing. And as detailed there, the only reason Donald Trump even gives a damn about Netanyahu following through isn't because of the genocide that's been happening right in front of our eyes, but that he looks good politically, ready to take credit after tens of thousands of people have been massacred. But let's keep it real. After Trump's constant threats to kill even more innocent people and Joe Biden's ongoing commitment to provide the means to do so for over a year, no one looks good here. And the credit that they're fighting over comes with ungodly amounts of murder on their records.
In our democracy.
Reporters in Gaza were on the receiving end of your bombs. Why did you keep the bombs flowing when we had a deal?
I'm happy to address questions.
We had a deal. Everyone in this room knows we had a deal, Tony, and you kept the bombs flowing.
I'm happy to address questions when we get a chance. Thank you.
Order on the mantle of your commitment to Zionism. Did you want to finish? Why did you allow my friends to be massacred? Why did you?
I'm happy to address your questions when we get to questions. Thank you. Thank you.
You helped destroy our religion, Judaism, by associating.
Yeah, I have a statement. Yeah, I have a statement to make. Thank you.
You waved the white flag before Netanyahu. You waved the white flag before Israeli fascism.
I look forward to taking questions when I get a chance to finish my statement. Thank you.
Your grandfather was an Israel lobbyist. Are you compromised by Israel? Why did you allow the Holocaust of our time to happen? How does it feel to have your legacy be genocide? How does it feel to have your legacy be genocide? You too, Matt. You smirk through the whole thing every day. You smirk through a genocide.
Thank you.